The airport buzzed with its unique, predictable symphony of chaos. A sound so familiar it was almost soothing. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of luggage wheels on polished tile. The distant, melodic chime of a gate change announcement. The low, constant hum of 1,000 conversations in 12 languages. For me, Elena, it was the soundtrack of anticipation. I stood in the bustling line for baggage drop, a small smile playing on my lips, my entire being thrumming with the quiet joy of a journey about to begin. This trip was a hard-earned reprieve. For months, my life had been a whirlwind of deadlines, a demanding project that had consumed my days and stolen my sleep. My husband, Daniel, had watched me push through the exhaustion, a constant, steady presence bringing me cups of tea and shouldering more than his share at home. This long weekend in Lisbon was his idea. "You need to breathe, meu amor," he'd said, his voice full of gentle concern. "We need to remember what we look like without a computer screen glowing between us." He'd planned it all, insisting on handling every detail, from booking the charming boutique hotel in Alfama to securing the coveted dinner reservations. My only job was to pack and show up. And I had. The stress of the past few months was already beginning to loosen its grip, sloughing away with every step I took further into this temple of transit. I felt lighter. I'd even packed on a whim, throwing in a flowing sundress and a wide-brimmed hat, items that felt like costumes from my pre-career, more carefree self. Daniel, ever the pragmatist, had kissed me goodbye at the curb, a firm, warm kiss that promised reunion and relaxation. "I'll park the car and meet you at security," he'd said, his hand lingering on mine. "Don't check that heavy carry-on, okay? I'll take it through for you." But I'd waved him off, feeling capable and independent. "Don't be silly. It's just one bag. I've got it." So here I was, inching forward in the queue, my trusted navy blue hardshell suitcase standing obediently by my side. It was a constant traveler, its surface a canvas of fine scratches and barely their scuffs. Each one a tiny souvenir from a past adventure. Felt like an old friend. I'd packed it myself with a meticulousness that bordered on the ritual. Shoes at the bottom in dust bags, toiletries in the clear zip pouch, the carefully rolled sundress on top. I knew every inch of it, every compartment, every secret pocket where I tucked my jewelry. Ahead of me, a family was struggling with an overstuffed duffel bag, laughing as they tried to force it onto the scale. The scene was normal, heartwarming. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Daniel. Asterisk, at the bag drop. Lines moving. Meet you soon. 3-inch asterisk. I imagined him finding a parking spot, probably cursing the airport traffic with that affectionate grumble of his. I was already mentally tasting the first sip of crisp Vinho Verde at a sun-drenched cafe, feeling the warm Portuguese sun on my skin. I was next in line. The airline agent, a woman with a kind face and a tired smile, gestured me forward. "Good morning. Destination and passport, please." I smiled back, sliding my documents across the counter with a sense of accomplishment. The vacation had officially begun. I maneuvered my suitcase toward the conveyor belt, my mind already miles away, across the ocean. It was the most mundane of moments, the absolute epitome of a routine departure. There was no foreboding music, no chilling premonition. There was only the gentle weight of my carry-on purse on my shoulder, the smooth handle of my suitcase in my palm, and the bright, hopeful certainty that the best was yet to come. I was perfectly, blissfully unaware that I was standing on the precipice, and that the most familiar thing in my world, my own luggage, was about to become a terrifying Pandora's box. The agent took my passport with a practiced smile, her fingers poised over the keyboard. "Just the one bag to check today?" "Yes, that's it," I said, my voice bright with anticipation. I began to tilt the suitcase onto its wheels, guiding it toward the gaping mouth of the conveyor belt. The motion was automatic, a gesture I'd performed dozens of times. The hum of the machinery, the rustle of my boarding pass in my hand, it was all part of the familiar pre-flight ballet. That's when I heard it. "Elena, wait!" The voice sliced through the airport's ambient noise, sharp and strained. It was Daniel's voice, but it was all wrong. It wasn't his usual calm, measured tone. It was stripped raw, frayed with a panic I had never heard from him before. I froze, one hand still on my suitcase, and turned. He was shouldering his way through the crowd, his face ashen. He wasn't running, but his walk was a frantic, stuttering rush. His eyes locked on me with an intensity that was frightening. He ignored the irritated glances of other travelers he jostled past. His messenger bag, usually slung neatly over his shoulder, was clutched tightly in his fist as if he'd forgotten it was there. "Don't!" he gasped, finally reaching me. He was slightly out of breath, not from exertion, but from pure adrenaline. He grabbed my wrist, his grip firm, almost urgent. "Don't check that bag." The airline agent paused, her smile faltering into a look of polite confusion. I stared at him, my own smile dissolving into bewilderment. "Daniel? What on earth? What's wrong?" A flutter of irrational fear went through me. Had he forgotten his passport? Had there been an accident? "You're white as a sheet." He didn't answer me directly. His eyes darted from my face to the suitcase and back again, his mind working furiously behind his wide, alarmed eyes. He was looking at the bag as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. I had a feeling," he said, his voice lower now, a desperate, private whisper meant only for me, cracked under the weight of the words. "A really bad feeling. The parking garage, something just, Elena, please, just don't. Take it as a carry-on. We'll pay the fee if we have to. Just don't let it go." I was utterly baffled. This was so unlike him. Daniel was the least superstitious man I knew. He was a financial analyst, a man of spreadsheets and logic, of calculated risks and proven data. He didn't believe in bad feelings. He believed in facts. "A feeling," I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "Honey, it's fine. It's just my suitcase. You're spooking me. Did something happen?" I searched his face for a logical explanation. A news alert on his phone, a warning from a cop, but found only sheer, unadulterated dread. The agent cleared her throat gently. "Sir? Ma'am? Is everything all right?" Daniel ignored her, his focus entirely on me. His plea was so visceral, so utterly out of character, that it bypassed my logic and went straight to my gut. He wasn't joking. He wasn't being difficult. He was genuinely, deeply terrified. "Please," he said again, and the raw vulnerability in that single word was what finally undid me. It was a tone he reserved for moments of true crisis, and hearing it here, in the bright, mundane light of the baggage drop, was more unsettling than anything else. My hand slipped from the suitcase's handle. The simple, routine action of checking a bag suddenly felt momentous and dangerous. The joyful anticipation of moments ago had vanished, replaced by a cold, creeping unease. "Okay," I said slowly, pulling the suitcase back toward me, its wheels scraping against the floor. "Okay, Daniel, it's okay. I won't check it." The relief that washed over his face was instantaneous and profound. His shoulders slumped, and he let out a shaky breath, as if he'd been holding it since the parking garage. He nodded, his grip on my wrist softening to a hold. The agent looked between us, her professional demeanor firmly back in place, though her eyes were now sharp with curiosity. "So, will you be taking the bag with you, then?" I looked at my husband, at the fear still lingering in his eyes, and then down at my innocent, familiar blue suitcase. It no longer looked like an old friend. It looked like a question mark. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'll be taking it with me." The walk from the baggage drop toward security was utterly surreal. The cheerful airport symphony now sounded distorted and menacing. The chatter of excited travelers felt like the buzzing of insects. Daniel walked stiffly beside me, his hand still clamped around my arm, his gaze fixed ahead, seeing nothing. He was a man possessed, moving on pure instinct. I, on the other hand, was hyper-aware of everything, especially the suitcase rolling obediently behind me. With every clack-clack of its wheels over the tile seams, a new doubt sprouted in my mind. Daniel's panic was a virus, and it had infected me completely. My initial bewilderment began to curdle into a low-grade, buzzing fear. Why had he reacted like that? What could possibly be in my bag that would cause such a visceral response? I ran through a mental inventory for the 100th time. Clothes, shoes, toiletries, a book. My jewelry roll was in my carry-on. There was nothing. Yet his terror was a fact. It hung in the air between us, a thick, suffocating fog. We found a relatively quiet corner near a bank of unused check-in kiosks. The plastic seats were cold and hard. "Daniel, talk to me," I pleaded, my voice low and urgent. "What is going on? You're scaring me." He finally looked at me, his eyes still wide, but now with a dawning, horrifying realization. "I don't know," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I was walking from the car, and it just hit me. A wave of dread, so powerful it almost made me sick. It was about your suitcase. I can't explain it. I just knew, with every fiber of my being, that you could not let that bag out of your sight. A psychic premonition? From my spreadsheet-loving husband? The absurdity of it should have comforted me, but it did the opposite. It made the situation feel even more dire, more unmoored from reality. My eyes dropped to the suitcase. It sat there, innocuous, familiar. And then, a thought, cold and sharp, pierced through the fear. "Did you pack it for me?" I asked, the question feeling both ridiculous and deadly serious. "As a surprise? Did you put something in it?" "No, of course not," he said, but a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "I mean, I zipped it up for you. You were on the phone. Remember? You asked me to close it up and bring it downstairs. A simple marital kindness, a task he'd done 100 times. But now it felt significant. Without a word, I pulled the suitcase toward me and laid it flat on the floor. My hands were trembling. I clicked the latches. The sound was deafening in the quiet corner. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was faint but undeniably there. Beneath the clean scent of my laundry detergent was something else. A dry, dusty, slightly sweet odor, like old paper and cinnamon. It was a smell I didn't recognize. It was not a smell from our house. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I unzipped the main compartment. Everything looked almost right. My carefully rolled clothes were there, but the order was subtly off. The sundress I'd placed on top was now nestled between my jeans and a sweater. It was a small thing, the kind of shift that could happen if the bag had been jostled. But I was a meticulous packer. I remembered. Then I lifted the top layer of clothes. Beneath them, the contents were not mine. Nestled next to my shoes were several tightly bound, brick-shaped objects, each one wrapped in layers of clear plastic and thick brown packing tape. They were heavy, dense. I hadn't noticed the weight before, but now, hefting one, it was inexplicably heavy for its size. Through the plastic, I could see what looked like compressed, off-white powder, and tucked beside them, wrapped in a soft cloth, was an ornate, antique-looking box made of dark, heavily carved wood. It was the source of the strange, spicy sweet smell. I recoiled as if I'd been burned, snapping my hand back. My blood ran cold. I looked up at Daniel, my eyes wide with a terror that now mirrored his own. The suitcase was mine on the outside, but on the inside, it was someone else's. And that someone had packed it with things that screamed of secrecy, of illegality, of unimaginable danger. The familiar scuffs and scratches on the shell of the bag no longer told a story of family vacations. They felt like a disguise. We weren't just holding a bag. We were holding a bomb. The world shrank to the space between me, Daniel, and the open suitcase. The airport's cacophony faded into a distant, meaningless roar. All I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart and Daniel's sharp, shallow breaths. We stared into the abyss of the bag, at the neatly packed bricks of white powder and the sinister, ornate box. The implications crashed over me, cold and suffocating. This wasn't a mistake. This was a setup. "Close it," Daniel whispered, his voice a strangled thread of sound. His face had lost all its color. "Close it right now." My hands, numb and clumsy, fumbled with the zipper, sealing the horrific secret inside. The simple click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence. We were now accomplices to its concealment, two ordinary people suddenly trapped in a nightmare. What do we do? I breathed, my mind racing in panicked circles. Throw it away? Abandon it? But we were on camera. Dozens of security cameras had already captured us. Our argument with the agent, our huddled conference over the open bag. We were tied to it. Daniel's analytical mind, frozen by shock, finally kicked into gear. He was a man who dealt in risk assessment, and the risk assessment was catastrophic. We can't move. We can't touch it again. We call security. Right now. It's the only play. But they'll think it's ours. The protest tore from me, a cry of pure, primal fear. They'll arrest us. They'll arrest us if we're caught with it trying to leave, he countered, his voice low and fierce. This is the only way. We report it. We tell the truth. The entire truth. He was right. I knew he was right. But the idea of willingly summoning the very force that might destroy us was terrifying. Daniel didn't wait for my agreement. He stood up, his posture rigid, and scanned the area. His eyes landed on a uniformed airport security officer standing near the terminal entrance, a young woman with a stern, competent expression. He approached her slowly, his hands visible. I watched, my body trembling, as he spoke to her. I saw his gestures, calm and deliberate. I saw her pleasant, bored expression shift to one of sharp attention. Her hand went to the radio on her shoulder. Time seemed to warp. One moment we were two people alone with our secret. The next, the space around us was cordoned off with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. The female officer was joined by two others, larger, their faces set in neutral masks. They didn't draw guns or yell. Their professionalism was somehow more frightening. Sir, ma'am, please come with me. It wasn't a request. We were escorted away from the suitcase, which now sat like a malevolent star at the center of a growing circle of empty space. Passengers were being subtly rerouted, their curious glances met with calm assurances from other staff. We were taken to a small, stark, windowless room off the main terminal. It was a holding room, an interrogation room, a table, a few chairs, a camera in the corner with a small red light glowing. The door clicked shut behind us, and the sound was that of a cell door slamming. The first wave of questions was polite but firm. Names, addresses, flight information, the story of the trip. I told it, my voice shaking, clinging to Daniel's hand under the table. I explained packing the bag myself. Daniel explained his feeling. It sounded insane. I could see the skepticism in the eyes of the serious-faced man in a suit who had joined us. He was no longer airport security, he was federal. Then came the second wave. The tone shifted, grew harder, more specific. Who gave you the bag? Were you aware of its contents? How much were you being paid to transport it? Where were you meeting your contact? Each question was a hammer blow. We were no longer witnesses or victims. We were persons of interest, suspects. Our dream vacation to Lisbon had vanished, replaced by the real possibility of prison, of a life ripped apart. I was crying now, tears of sheer, helpless frustration and fear. Daniel held my hand tighter, his answers remaining steady, consistent, but I could feel the tremor in his grip. We were in a trap. The suitcase was the bait, and we had walked right into it. Our only hope was a story that sounded like a desperate lie and a premonition that defied all logic. We were utterly, terrifyingly alone. The door to the stark, windowless room opened again. The federal agent, who had introduced himself as Agent Miller, entered, followed by a colleague wearing latex gloves and carrying a large, heavy-duty black case. The air, already thick with tension, grew colder. The gloved agent didn't look at us. His focus was entirely on the task, his movements precise and clinical. He placed the case on the floor, unlatched it, and began removing equipment. Evidence bags, tweezers, a small digital scale, a field test kit. My stomach clenched. This was no longer an interview. This was a forensic examination. Agent Miller stood with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on us. "We've retrieved your luggage," he stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. We are going to open it and inventory the contents. You will confirm what belongs to you and what does not. Is that understood?" We nodded, mute with dread. The gloved agent brought my blue suitcase into the room and placed it on the table. Seeing it there, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the interrogation room, it looked alien, like a piece of evidence from a crime show. It was no longer my travel companion. It was the star witness for the prosecution. The agent clicked the latches. The sound echoed in the silent room. He slowly unzipped the main compartment. The first layer was mine. My neatly rolled clothes, my shoes in their dust bags. The agent meticulously lifted each item, showing it to us before placing it in a clear evidence bag. "This is yours," he'd ask, and I'd numbly confirm, "Yes." Each admission felt like a step closer to a guilty verdict. Then he reached the layer beneath. He lifted my last sweater. And there they were, the bricks. Not just 2 or 3. There were 6 of them, each the size of a large hardcover book, wrapped in layers of thick, industrial plastic and sealed with heavy-duty brown tape. The agent carefully lifted one. It was heavy, its weight undeniable. He placed it on the digital scale. The numbers flickered and settled. "Approximately 1 kilogram each," he stated flatly. He then took a small, knife-like tool and made a tiny, precise incision in the plastic of one brick. Using tweezers, he extracted a minuscule amount of the compressed, off-white powder and placed it into a vial from the field test kit. He added a few drops of a clear liquid, capped the vial, and shook it. We all watched. The seconds stretched into eternity. The liquid in the vial turned a definitive, brilliant blue. "Positive for cocaine," the agent announced, his voice as neutral as if he were reading the weather. "Approximately 6 kilos. The number hung in the air. 6 kilos. It was a quantity that spoke of major trafficking, not personal use. A quantity that carried a sentence measuring in decades. But he wasn't finished. Next to the bricks, wrapped in a soft, black cloth, was the ornate wooden box. The agent unwrapped it. The carving was intricate, ancient-looking, depicting serpents and strange symbols. That faint, spicy sweet smell, now unmistakably sandalwood and something else, something earthy, filled the small room. He carefully opened the clasp. Nestled inside on a bed of faded velvet weren't jewels. It was a passport, a handful of loose, uncut diamonds that glittered coldly under the lights, and a single, sleek, black USB drive. Agent Miller picked up the passport. It was not Brazilian. He flipped it open. The photo was of a man with a hard face and cold eyes, a face I had never seen before. The name was also unknown. He then picked up the USB drive, holding it by the edges. "This is a high-capacity, encrypted device," he said, more to his colleague than to us. "Standard for moving financial data or operational details." He finally looked at us, his eyes like flint. The clinical inventory was over. The gravity of the situation crashed down with the force of a tidal wave. This wasn't just about drugs. This was about identity theft, smuggling, international finance, or espionage. The suitcase was a Pandora's box of criminal enterprise. My legs gave way. I sank into the chair, a sob catching in my throat. Daniel's arm went around me, but he was shaking too. The reality was far worse than we could have ever imagined. We weren't just caught with drugs. We were caught with a complete, terrifying mystery that belonged to someone else. Someone who had gone to incredible lengths to hide it in our luggage. The what had been answered. The who and why were a terrifying void, and we were trapped at its very center. The sterile room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in with the weight of the revealed contraband. The positive cocaine test and the contents of the ornate box weren't just evidence. They were a narrative, a story of sophisticated criminality in which Daniel and I had been cast as the lead actors. Agent Miller's previously neutral demeanor hardened into something colder, sharper. We were no longer just people with a strange story. We were suspects in a major felony. "Let's go through this again," Miller said, his voice low and deliberate. He pulled a chair out and sat opposite us, placing a digital recorder on the table between us. The red light glowed, a tiny, unblinking eye. "From the beginning. You packed the bag yourself, Miss Silva? Yes, I said, my voice thin and reedy. Last night. In our bedroom. And you're certain you locked it afterward? I think so. I always do. But doubt, that treacherous serpent, began to coil in my gut. Did I? I've been tired, distracted by last-minute work emails. The memory was fuzzy. You think so? Miller pounced on the hesitation. A bag containing over $6 million worth of cocaine, and you're not sure if you locked it? The number, $6 million asterisk, hit me like a physical blow. I felt dizzy. It was in our locked house, Daniel interjected, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and defiance. No one broke in. Nothing was disturbed. So, the alternative is that it was tampered with between your house and the airport, Miller stated, his eyes flicking between us. Did you leave it unattended at any point? Curbside? Did anyone bump into you? Offer to help. We racked our brains, the pressure making it impossible to think clearly. The journey from the car to the terminal was a blur of normalcy. No, Daniel said finally. No, I took it from the trunk and wheeled it right to the line. Elena was ahead of me. I never let go of it. Except when you went to park the car, Miller corrected him smoothly. You left her alone with the bag. For how long? 10 minutes? 15. A new layer of ice formed in my veins. He was right. Those minutes I'd spent alone in line, texting Daniel, people watching, had someone? This is insane, Daniel breathed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. We're being set up. Can't you see that? Why would I have a premonition, as you call it, and stop her from checking a bag full of drugs that I supposedly planted? It doesn't make any sense. It makes sense if you got cold feet. The other agent, who had remained silent by the door, spoke for the first time. His voice was a low rumble. If you had second thoughts about the risk. The premonition story is a convenient way to abort the mission without alerting your contacts. A story you concocted together. The logic of the accusation was perverse and airtight. They were weaving a plausible tapestry from the threads of our nightmare. Our truth sounded like the weakest, most fabricated lie imaginable. The questions came harder and faster, circling, probing for inconsistencies. Where were you flying to again? Lisbon. A common transit point for European distribution. What is your financial situation? Any recent debts? Unexplained deposits? Who knew you were taking this trip? We answered, our stories consistent but our spirits breaking. I was crying openly now, tears of sheer helplessness. We were trapped in a labyrinth with no exit, and the Minotaur was a suit and a tie, armed with a recorder and a terrifyingly rational suspicion. They separated us then. A classic tactic, to see if our stories would change. I was led to another identical, windowless room. Alone, without Daniel's anchoring presence, the terror became absolute. The agent with me was a woman, her expression not unkind but utterly implacable. Elena, she said, her voice softer but no less intense. Help me understand. Did Daniel ever ask you to carry something for him? A gift for a friend? A business sample? Maybe he didn't tell you what it was. Maybe he was scared to. She was offering me a way out. A way to blame him, to save myself. The thought was so horrifying it snapped me back to a sliver of clarity. No, I said, my voice firmer than it had been in hours. Never. My husband is a good man. He saved us. He had a feeling and he acted on it. That's the only truth. Someone put those things in my bag. You need to be looking for them, not us. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something. Not belief, but perhaps a minuscule crack of doubt, in the agent's eyes. The sheer illogic of our actions if we were guilty was perhaps our only fragile defense. We weren't acting like criminals. We were acting like two terrified people who had just stumbled into a hell they never knew existed. The dynamic in the room shifted. It was subtle, but after hours of being the prime targets of the investigation, we became acutely aware of it. Agent Miller received a call on his secure phone. His responses were terse. Understood. Yes, run it. Every frame. He hung up and looked at us, his expression unreadable but his energy now focused outward. Your house, he stated. A team is there now. They've confirmed no signs of forced entry. Your alarm was set. Your neighbor's Ring doorbell cameras show no activity at your address between your departure and our arrival. A sliver of hope, thin and sharp as a razor blade. Our home was secure. The violation hadn't happened there. The relief was immediately followed by a deeper dread. If not at home, then where? The parking garage, Daniel said, the words escaping him in a rush. At the airport. I left the bag in the trunk when I went to park. I drove around for nearly 10 minutes looking for a spot. It was a madhouse. Miller's eyes narrowed. He picked up his phone again. I need all CCTV from the short-term parking garage, levels P2 through P4, for the last 90 minutes. Focus on vehicles matching the Silva's description. Look for any activity near their car after Mr. Silva exited. He then turned his attention back to the suitcase itself, now sealed in an evidence bag. The switch happened quickly and professionally. They didn't have time to unpack and repack. They replaced the entire bag. My mind reeled. Replaced it? But it's mine. The scratches, the scuff near the wheel. A convincing duplicate. The other agent, Agent Carter, said. A high-quality one. They scuffed it to match. They must have been watching you, studying your luggage for days. They knew exactly what to replicate. The thought was chilling. We had been stalked. Our lives, our routines, our possessions had been quietly inventoried by a ghost. Miller's phone buzzed. He listened, his body going still. You have a match? License plate? Run it. Now. He looked at us, and for the first time, there was no suspicion in his gaze, only a cold, professional intensity. They found it. A dark gray sedan. Pulled into a space 2 rows over from you less than a minute after you drove in. Driver remained in the vehicle. When you got out and walked toward the elevator, he did too. He popped his own trunk first, then went straight to yours. He was in and out in under 60 seconds. He used a key fob scanner to unlock your car. Professional. Smooth. The image was horrifyingly clear. A stranger, sliding into the space where our car had just been, coolly violating our private space in the middle of a crowded public garage. While Daniel was fruitlessly circling for a spot, our trunk was being looted and sabotaged. The camera at the elevator bank, Daniel said, his voice tight with a mix of horror and vindication. He would have been carrying my wife's real suitcase. Did they get him? Miller's face was grim. He kept his head down, wore a cap. But we have him on camera entering the elevator with a blue hardshell suitcase. He exited on the departures level and blended into the crowd. We're tracking his path through the terminal now. The hunt was on, but it was no longer hunting us. We were receding from the spotlight, our innocence becoming a plausible, then a probable, and now, it seemed, a near certainty to the agents in the room. The focus was shifting from the who of us to the who of the man in the gray sedan. We were no longer suspects. We were the lead witnesses, the victims of a terrifyingly precise and malicious plot. The relief was so potent it felt like a physical illness. But it was immediately tempered by a new, profound fear. The man in the gray sedan was still out there. And he knew who we were. He knew what we looked like. He knew we had disrupted his plan and were now helping the authorities hunt him. The nightmare wasn't over. It had just changed shape. We had gone from fearing prison to fearing the shadowy, professional criminal who had tried to use us as disposable pawns, and who might now see us as a loose end that needed to be tied up. The atmosphere in the sterile room shifted from one of tense interrogation to a buzzing, focused investigation. We were offered water. The agents' postures became less confrontational, more collaborative. We were no longer the puzzle. We were a source of pieces for a much larger, darker puzzle. Agent Miller's phone seemed to be a live wire to the investigation unfolding outside. Each buzz delivered a new fragment of information. The gray sedan was a rental, he relayed, his eyes scanning a tablet another officer had brought in. Paid for with a stolen credit card. Clean. Dead end. They were pulling our lives apart digitally, looking for a connection, a vulnerability the smuggler could have exploited. Who knew your travel itinerary? Miller asked again, But this time the question was different. It wasn't an accusation. It was a search for a breach. "Just us," Daniel said, then corrected himself. "And my assistant, Sophia. She booked the hotel. She always handles my travel." The name hung in the air. Sophia. She'd been Daniel's assistant for 5 years. She was family. She sent Christmas cards. She knew our son's birthday. Miller's fingers flew across his tablet. He pulled up her record. Clean. He pulled up her financials. Nothing out of the ordinary. It seemed like another dead end. Then Agent Carter, who had been silently monitoring the flood of data from the command center, spoke up. "Sir," cross-referencing the garage CCTV with the terminal footage. The subject with the duplicate suitcase. He didn't just blend into the crowd. He approached a specific individual at a coffee kiosk. A brief exchange. He handed off the real suitcase. Miller leaned in. "Do we have a face on the recipient?" The agent's expression was grim. "We do. And we have an ID. Facial recognition got a hit. It's a low-level player. Known to us. A courier named Rafael Santos. He's currently in the terminal. We've got eyes on him. He's waiting at the gate for the flight to Lisbon." The air left my lungs. Our flight. The courier was going to take our place. He was going to board the plane with my legitimate suitcase, now filled with God knows what, and fly to Lisbon. The sheer audacity of the plan was breathtaking. "Pick him up. Now," Miller ordered, his voice a low growl. Quietly. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then the confirmation came. "Santos is in custody. He's not talking, but he had the Silva suitcase with him. We're bringing it in." The door opened, and a new agent wheeled in my suitcase. The real one. The scuff by the wheel was there, but it was mine, the one I'd packed. They opened it. Inside were my clothes, my sundress on top, my toiletries. It was perfectly, beautifully normal. The relief was so profound it was dizzying. But it was short-lived. Miller's phone buzzed again. He listened, and his face underwent a startling transformation. The cool professionalism evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer, unvarnished shock. He slowly lowered the phone and stared at us. "We pressed Santos," he said, his voice hollow with disbelief, "threatened him with the full weight of an international trafficking charge. He broke almost immediately. He gave up his contact. The person who hired him to be at that coffee kiosk, to receive the suitcase and board that flight." He paused, the name clearly sticking in his throat. He looked not at me, but at Daniel. His gaze was filled with a strange, awful pity. "It was your assistant, Sophia. She wasn't just the booker. She was the architect." The world stopped. Daniel made a sound, a small, wounded gasp, as if he'd been punched in the gut. His face crumpled. "No, that's impossible. Why? Why?" "The why is always money, Mr. Silva," Miller said softly. "We just pulled her financials again, digging deeper, offshore accounts. She's been moving small amounts for years, hidden in fake consulting fees. She was in deep debt. They found her. They owned her. And she knew everything about you. Your schedule. Your travel habits. Your trust. The betrayal was absolute. Devastating. It wasn't a random criminal. It was the person who answered his phone, who organized his life, who knew the intimate details of our family. She had used her knowledge of our routines, of our trust, to orchestrate our destruction. She had studied my suitcase, arranged for the duplicate, and hired the man to make the switch, all while sending cheerful emails confirming our dinner reservations. Daniel sank into a chair, his head in his hands. His entire body shook. This wasn't just a crime. It was a profound personal violation that cut deeper than any stranger's act ever could. The nightmare had a face now, and it was the face of someone we had laughed with, someone we had trusted implicitly. The hunt was over. The truth was out. And it was more painful than any suspicion we had endured. We were free, but we were utterly broken. The foundation of our safety had been shattered not by a monster in the shadows, but by a friendly face in the light. The formalities that followed were a blur conducted in a state of shock. We were no longer prisoners in the interrogation room. We were victims being processed. Paperwork was signed. Official apologies were offered by higher-ranking officials. Their words smooth and practiced, meant to soothe but landing on the raw, exposed nerve of our new reality. They offered us counseling services, a leaflet with a number to call, as if a therapist could unscramble the profound sense of betrayal that had been drilled into our souls. We were escorted out of the airport through a back corridor, avoiding the bustling main terminal. The bright, normal world outside felt like an assault. The sun was too bright. The sounds of cars and birds were too loud. People were going about their lives, utterly unaware that the world contained people like Sophia, plots like this, and horrors that could be hidden inside a trusted piece of luggage. The drive home was silent. The relief of being exonerated was entirely eclipsed by the gut-wrenching pain of how it had happened. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. I knew him. He was replaying every interaction, every shared confidence. Every time he'd said, "Sophia, can you handle this?" He was dissecting 5 years of trust, searching for a lie he'd missed, a sign he'd overlooked. The guilt was already eating him alive. He had brought her into our lives. He had trusted her. I reached over and placed my hand on his arm. He flinched, just slightly, and the tiny reaction broke my heart all over again. The instinct to comfort was met with a wall of shared trauma. We were together, but we were alone in our pain. Walking back into our house was one of the hardest things I've ever done. It no longer felt like a sanctuary, felt like a crime scene. The place where I had lovingly packed my bag was now the place where the plot against us had begun. Every room felt tainted. I looked at the landline phone on the kitchen counter and wondered if she had used it to make her arrangements. I saw a postcard on the fridge, a funny one she'd sent from a vacation last year. I took it down and threw it in the trash, my hands trembling. The days that followed were a lesson in the anatomy of trauma. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every car that drove by a little too slowly, sent my heart into a frantic gallop. I jumped at the sound of my own phone ringing. I couldn't bring myself to unpack the real suitcase. It sat in the corner of our bedroom like a ghost. The trust was gone. Not just for Sophia, but for everyone. For everything. Daniel would double-check every locked door, every window, long after I'd already checked them. He scrutinized every piece of mail, every email, with a paranoid intensity that was painful to watch. The easy, open man I had married had been replaced by a wary, haunted stranger. We tried to talk about it, but the words were inadequate. How do you describe the feeling that the fabric of your reality has been torn? That the people you rely on might be harboring a monstrous secret? The why from Daniel was a constant, agonizing refrain. Why did she do it? Was it all a lie? Every smile? Every "how's Leo doing?" We were free from jail, but we were prisoners in our own home, in our own minds. The vacation to Lisbon was, of course, cancelled. The colorful travel brochures that had once filled me with excitement were now just pictures of a world that felt distant and dangerous. The trip wasn't just a week lost. It was a symbol of a future that had been stolen from us, replaced by a present filled with fear and a past that had been rewritten into something sinister. We had survived a disaster, but we were left standing in the wreckage of our sense of security. The question wasn't just how to move on. It was how to ever feel safe in our own skin again. The suitcase had been a vessel for contraband, but it had also carried a different, more insidious poison, the venom of betrayal, and it was spreading through our lives, paralyzing us from the inside out. Weeks bled into months. The sharp, serrated edge of the trauma slowly dulled, but it never disappeared. It became a permanent ache, a low-grade hum of anxiety that was the new background noise of our lives. The police updates became less frequent. Sophia's case was moving through the glacial pace of the justice system. We were told she had cooperated fully, naming her handlers in a desperate bid for a reduced sentence. It offered no comfort, felt like the closing of a file, but for us the story was far from over. The suitcase was eventually returned to us by the authorities, all evidence processed. Daniel carried it into the garage and, without a word, took a box cutter to it, slicing the fabric and breaking the shell before stuffing it into a trash bag. It wasn't an act of anger, but of exorcism. We couldn't have it in the house. Its presence was a trigger, a relic from a life we no longer recognized. We became different people. The change was profound and, in some ways, permanent. The easy, open trust we had once extended to the world was gone, replaced by a cautious, hypervigilant scrutiny. Daniel installed a comprehensive security system, cameras at every door, motion sensors, a reinforced deadbolt. He researched every purchase, every app, for data vulnerabilities. He was no longer just a husband and father. He was a warden, determined to fortress our lives against a threat he now knew was real. I changed too. My spontaneity evaporated. I now mentally logged every person in a room, noted every unattended bag. I found myself studying the faces of service people, of neighbors, a part of me always waiting for the mask to slip. The world had revealed its capacity for calculated malice, and I could never unsee it. But from the wreckage, something else began to grow. A fierce, burning gratitude. It was a conscious choice, a daily fight against the paranoia. We had been inches from a fate too horrific to contemplate. We hadn't just avoided a missed flight. We had avoided a life sentence in a foreign prison, the complete destruction of our family, the loss of everything we held dear. Daniel's feeling, that inexplicable premonition, was no longer a source of confusion. It was our foundational myth, our miracle. We spoke of it not with embarrassment, but with a reverent awe. It had been a flaw in the universe's cruel design, a crack in the plan of whoever had sought to destroy us. It was the thread we had pulled to unravel the entire nightmare. One evening, we were in the backyard, watching the sunset. The silence between us was no longer heavy with unsaid fears, but peaceful. Daniel reached over and took my hand. "I was thinking," he said, his voice quiet, "about Lisbon." My heart, as it always did at the mention of the trip, gave a nervous flutter. "What about it?" "I think we should go," he said. "Not now, but someday. We can't let them steal that, too." I looked at him, at the resolve in his eyes, and felt a piece of the broken world click back into place. He wasn't saying we should be careless. He was saying we couldn't let the fear win. The lesson wasn't to never trust again. The lesson was to trust differently, to trust our own instincts above all else, to value the fragile, precious gift of safety, and to never, ever dismiss a warning, no matter how illogical it seems. The narrow escape hadn't just taught us about the darkness in the world. It had taught us about the light within ourselves, the instinct that howls when something is wrong, the love that fights to be heard, and the incredible, fragile miracle of a disaster averted. We would never be the carefree people we were before, but we were still here. We were together, and we were forever vigilant, forever grateful for the voice that cracked with fear and the desperate plea that saved our lives. Asterisk, don't check that bag. Asterisk.